all mankind. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. These words from John Locke weren't just about government. They were about the most intimate battlefield of all: love. You've been lied to about love your entire life. Every romantic comedy, every love song, every Valentine's Day card has sold you a beautiful fiction. That love is selfless, pure, transcendent. That it lifts us above our base nature into something divine. But what if I told you that love, real love, the kind that actually exists between flawed human beings, is nothing more than the most sophisticated power game ever invented? John Locke, the 17th century philosopher who gave us the foundations of modern democracy, understood something about human nature that we've conveniently forgotten. He knew that every human interaction, no matter how dressed in noble language, comes down to the fundamental question: who has the power and how will they use it? Think about your last relationship. Really think about it. Beneath all the sweet words and tender moments, wasn't there always an undercurrent of negotiation? Who called first? Who said "I love you" first? Who needed the other more? Who had the upper hand? You felt it, didn't you? That subtle dance of advance and retreat, of giving and withholding, of emotional leverage carefully calculated and deployed. Remember the last time someone broke up with you. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was political. In that moment, you realized that all your careful strategies, all your emotional investments, all your assumptions about shared power had been built on sand. The other person had simply exercised their ultimate authority, the right to withdraw consent, and suddenly you were powerless. Or think about the relationships where you held the cards, where you were the one who loved less, who needed less, who could walk away more easily. How different did love feel from that position? How much more generous could you afford to be when generosity was a choice rather than a desperate attempt to keep someone interested? Locke argued that in the state of nature, before governments and social contracts, humans lived in constant awareness of their vulnerability to others. We formed societies not out of love, but out of the practical need for protection and mutual benefit. Love, he would argue, operates on the same principle. We don't fall in love. We negotiate our way into emotional contracts where the terms are rarely spoken aloud, but always understood. The person who loves less has the power. The person who needs less controls the relationship. The person who can walk away holds all the cards. This isn't cynicism, this is clarity. This is seeing love as it actually is, not as we've been conditioned to believe it should be. But here's what's truly disturbing. We've been taught to see this power dynamic as the enemy of love, when it's actually love's most essential feature. We've been conditioned to believe that acknowledging the game somehow makes us bad people, manipulative, unworthy of real love. So we pretend the game doesn't exist while playing it unconsciously, badly, and with devastating results. Locke's greatest insight wasn't about government, it was about consent. He argued that legitimate authority could only exist when people freely agreed to be governed, when they entered into a social contract for mutual benefit. Every relationship, every romantic partnership, is nothing more than an unspoken social contract between two emotional territories seeking to maximize their interests while minimizing their vulnerabilities. But here's what makes romantic contracts so insidious. We pretend they don't exist. We wrap them in the language of destiny, soulmates, and unconditional love. We tell ourselves that true love requires no negotiation, no boundaries, no protection of self-interest. We've been taught that calculating the costs and benefits of love makes us cold, unromantic, unworthy of the real thing. This is precisely the delusion that keeps us powerless. Consider how we talk about love. I can't live without you. You complete me. I'd do anything for you. These aren't expressions of love, they're declarations of surrender. They're the emotional equivalent of signing away your rights in Locke's state of nature, making yourself completely vulnerable to another person's will. But let's dig deeper into what these contracts actually look like in practice. When you move in together, You're not just sharing space, you're negotiating territorial rights. Whose furniture stays? Whose routines take? Precedence? Who controls the thermostat? These seem like trivial decisions, but they're actually establishing the fundamental power structure of your domestic government. When you merge friend groups, you're creating diplomatic relations between two previously sovereign social territories. When you decide how often to see each other's families, you're establishing foreign policy. When you agree on how to handle money, you're writing your economic constitution. When you negotiate sexual frequency and preferences, you're determining the most intimate terms of your social contract. The couples who thrive are the ones who recognize these negotiations for what they are and engage in them consciously, fairly, with mutual respect for each other's interests. The couples who suffer are the ones who pretend these negotiations aren't happening, while unconsciously manipulating, resenting, and power struggling their way through every decision. Locke understood that sustainable relationships require what he called reciprocal consent, an ongoing agreement where both parties maintain their essential autonomy while choosing to share certain benefits. In healthy relationships, this translates to two complete individuals who choose to enhance each other's lives, not two incomplete people desperately trying to merge into one dysfunctional whole. The most successful couples you know aren't the ones who complete each other. They're the ones who maintain their individual power while choosing to combine their strengths. They understand the unspoken contract. I will share my emotional, physical, and intellectual resources with you as long as you do the same for me, and as long as this arrangement serves both our interests. This sounds unromantic only if you've been programmed to believe that love requires the sacrifice of your essential self. But what if the opposite is true? What if the deepest love is only possible between two people who are powerful enough to choose each other freely, rather than desperately enough to need each other completely? Think about the relationships in your life that feel most balanced, most satisfying, most sustainable. I guarantee they're the ones where both people maintain their individual identity, their personal interests, their separate friendships, their autonomous decision-making capacity. Where both people bring something valuable to the table and know they could survive, even thrive, without the other. The power dynamics aren't the corruption of love. They are love, stripped of its pretty disguises and seen for what it actually is, the most complex negotiation two humans can undertake. Locke's most radical idea was about property, that every person owns themselves and the fruits of their labor. No king, no government, no authority can claim ownership over your life, your body, your mind without your consent. But when it comes to love, we abandon this principle entirely. We speak of belonging to someone, of being taken, of giving ourselves completely away. This is where the game becomes dangerous. When you say, "I'm yours," what exactly are you signing over? When someone demands to know where you were, who you were with, what you were thinking, they're claiming property rights over your inner life. When jealousy becomes the proof of love, when checking your partner's phone becomes normal, when you start believing that love means having no secrets, no separate self, no private thoughts, you've entered into an emotional dictatorship. Locke would call this tyranny. He'd recognize it as the same impulse that leads kings to claim divine right over their subjects, the same logic that insists submission is the highest form of devotion. In his second treatise of government, he wrote, "Slavery is so vile and miserable an estate of man, that 'tis hardly to be conceived that an Englishman, much less a gentleman, should plead for it. Yet in love, we plead for exactly this kind of slavery. We call it romance. But let's examine what this looks like in the granular details of modern relationships. Your partner wants to know your phone password. They claim it's about trust. But what they're really demanding is surveillance rights over your digital life. They get upset when you make plans without consulting them first. They frame it as consideration, but what they're asserting is veto power over your autonomy. They want to know about every conversation you have with members of the opposite sex. They call it transparency. But what they're establishing is ownership over your social interactions. Each of these seemingly small concessions represents a Transfer of sovereignty from you to them. And here's the insidious part. They are usually presented as proof of your love. If you have nothing to hide, if you really loved me, if I mattered to you. These phrases are the emotional equivalent of if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't mind being searched. The healthiest relationships operate like Locke's ideal government, with clear boundaries, mutual consent, and the retained right of revolution. Each person maintains sovereignty over their essential self, while choosing to share certain privileges and responsibilities. You can choose to give your partner access to your time, your body, your emotional support, your companionship, but you cannot give away your right to exist as a separate person. Watch how people talk about their relationships. She won't let me. He doesn't allow me to. I have to ask permission. These aren't the words of partners. They're the words of subjects describing their rulers. They've internalized a power structure where love is measured by how much autonomy you're willing to surrender. But here's where it gets really twisted. The people who surrender the most autonomy often feel the least loved. Because deep down, they know they're not being chosen. They're being controlled. They know their partner's devotion isn't based on attraction or admiration, but on their successful elimination of all other options. Consider the difference between these two statements. I love you so much I can't imagine life without you, versus I love you so much I would never want to live without you. The first is dependence masquerading as devotion. The second is choice celebrating itself. But here's the paradox that Locke understood. True partnership is only possible between equals. You cannot love someone you own, and you cannot be truly loved by someone who owns you. Possession kills the very thing it claims to cherish. The moment one person becomes the property of another, love dies and something else, control, dependency, fear, takes its place. This is why the most passionate relationships often burn out so quickly. Passion without respect for personal sovereignty is just mutual consumption. Both people are trying to devour each other, to merge completely, to eliminate the separateness that creates the very tension that made them attractive to each other in the first place. The most powerful thing you can do in a relationship is maintain your right to leave, not because you want to leave, but because knowing you could choose to stay makes your presence a gift rather than a given. When your partner knows you're with them by choice rather than by necessity, every day becomes a renewal of your commitment, rather than just another day of imprisonment. Locke gave us the philosophical framework for political revolution, but his most profound insight applies to the revolution we each must wage within our own hearts. The right to withdraw consent from any system that no longer serves our fundamental interests, especially including the systems we've created in our most intimate relationships. You have the right to revolution in love. When a government becomes destructive of the ends for which it was established, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Locke argued that people have not just the right, but the duty to alter or abolish it. The same principle applies to relationships that have become destructive to your essential self. You are not bound by emotional contracts that drain your life force, diminish your autonomy, or require you to become less than who you are. But here's what most people don't understand about revolution. It's not primarily about overthrowing the other person's power. It's about reclaiming your own. The revolution isn't about making your partner change. It's about refusing to participate in patterns that diminish you. It's about saying no to emotional taxation without representation. It's about declaring independence from relationships that exist only through your continued surrender of self. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or cruel. It means becoming sovereign. It means recognizing that the highest form of love isn't sacrifice. It's choice. Every day you wake up and choose your partner not because you need them to complete you, not because you're afraid of being alone, not because you've surrendered your right to imagine alternatives, but because your life is genuinely better with them in it. Most people are terrified of this kind of freedom because it requires them to become worthy of being chosen. It's easier to believe in unconditional love, in soulmates, in relationships that are meant to be, than to do the daily work of remaining someone worth choosing. It's easier to bind someone to you through guilt, through need, through emotional manipulation than to earn their presence through genuine value. Think about the people in your life who you most enjoy spending time with. Are they the ones who need you desperately, who can't function without your constant validation and support? Or are they the ones who have their own interesting lives, their own sources of fulfillment, their own capacity for happiness, who choose to include you because you add something valuable to their already rich existence? The most attractive people, not physically but existentially, are the ones who don't need you. They want you, they enjoy you, they value what you bring to their life, but they're complete without you. Their interest in you is a choice, not a compulsion. Their love is a gift, not a desperate attempt to fill a void. This is what Locke understood about legitimate authority. It can only exist through the ongoing consent of the governed. The moment authority becomes tyrannical, the moment it serves the ruler rather than the ruled, it loses its legitimacy, and revolution becomes not just a right, but a moral imperative. But the people who understand Locke's deeper truth, that all legitimate power comes from consent freely given, they experience something most people never will. They know they are loved, not because they've trapped someone, but because they've attracted someone. Not because they've made themselves indispensable, but because they've made themselves irreplaceable. There's a profound difference between being indispensable and being irreplaceable. Indispensable means someone can't function without you, which creates resentment, dependency, and eventual rebellion. Irreplaceable means that while someone could theoretically function without you, they wouldn't want to, because what you bring to their life is unique, valuable, and enhancing. The revolution isn't about leaving your partner. It's about becoming the kind of person who could leave but chooses to stay. It's about transforming your relationships from systems of mutual dependence into alliances of mutual empowerment. It's about creating partnerships where both people are enhanced by the connection rather than diminished by it. Here's what this looks like in practice. You maintain your individual interests, friendships, and goals. You support your partner's autonomy rather than trying to control it. You speak truthfully about your needs and boundaries rather than manipulating to get them met. You take responsibility for your own happiness rather than making your partner responsible for it. You choose your partner daily rather than taking them for granted. This isn't easy. It requires constant vigilance against the human tendency to seek security through control. It requires faith that freedom will create more love, not less. It requires the courage to risk being rejected for who you really are, rather than being accepted for who you pretend to be. Love isn't the opposite of power. Love is power, the ultimate power, the power to see another person clearly and choose them anyway. But that choice has to be free, renewed daily, earned continuously by both parties. John Locke knew that freedom is never given, it's taken. The same is true in love. No one will grant you emotional sovereignty. You have to declare it, defend it, and live it. Only then will you discover what love actually is when it's stripped of its chains and allowed to breathe free. The question isn't whether love is a game of power. The question is, are you playing to win or are you playing to lose? And remember, in this game, winning doesn't mean defeating your partner. Winning means creating something together that makes both of you more powerful, more free, more fully yourself than you could ever be alone. That's the revolution. That's the love worth fighting for.